and let's spend a little time with Melvin Gumal. He manages the Biodiversity Conservation and Research Division at Sarawak Forestry Corporation, so Parks and Wildlife. He's been working with orangutan conservation in Sarawak since 1988. So in 2014, he won the Whitley Award for conservation in Ape Habitats for his work. So that's basically the green Oscars. That's a big deal. Very cool. He also won the Whitley Continuation Award to further his conservation work with orangutans in 2017. So let's bring Melvin in live with us. Hey, Melvin, how are you?
Pretty good, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you loud and clear.
Good, excellent. That was really good listening to Colin's work, and you're not the only one who's jealous.
Yeah,
we definitely are. Look, I'm cooped up at home and trying to get the work done in the field. Yeah, no, absolutely. Good stuff. Well, I mean, we're thrilled to have you joining us. Congratulations on the success of your work, being recognized for the work that you're doing. Let's jump into it. We'd love to learn a little bit more. Okay, I'll start sharing now. Share screen. Oops, what is this thing?
Let me know if you get any funny messages and I can help you out. Oh, there it is. I see it loading. Let's see if we can go full screen.
Does it work?
Okay, Melvin, let's try and share in a slightly different way. If you exit the screen share, and this time when it pops up, if you choose the first option to share the entire screen, and then that tends to give a nicer full screen view.
This one?
Yeah, that first option, the entire screen.
It's not the entire screen right now, is it?
It hasn't come up yet. When you click that first option for entire screen, you'll see that the share button isn't lit up. You have to click the little box that shows your screen, and then that share button will light up.
Share screen, the little box. Entire screen?
Yep.
Yeah, share.
There we go, loading now. Let's try pop the presentation up, hit full screen, and I think we're off to the races.
Okay, let's give it a shot. Is it going?
Yeah, let me pop it in. And then one more thing, Melvin, do you want to try and hit that little hide at the bottom? Then we get a nice, there we go. We're good, we're cooking.
Okay, here we go. Right, thanks very much, Joe, for inviting us to talk about the work on orangutans. I'll take you through a little bit of history of what we've been doing in the state of Sarawak. It encompasses a lot of different actors involved. So this is what I'll be talking about, the history and the conservation interventions to date in saving the species. And the work involves a whole bunch of people. And the overview that I'm going to give for today is the background work, some of the current initiatives, some successes on the way, and you'll see threads interspersed in the talk as well, and the various agencies that have helped along the way with funds and with support in terms of research work in getting the work done. So here we go. We are in Sarawak on the island of Borneo, and the northern part of it, western part of it, as you can see. And back in the early days, this was when orangutans were spread throughout Sarawak in the 1800s and so forth. You'd see them spreading from places like in Kuching Division, on the Exmos on the left or on the west, right up north, up till near Brunei area. But we also had, during those times in the 1840s, the science was into taxonomy and animals were collected, and among the various people that collected animals included people like Hornaday, Beccari, and so on. And over 200 animals were collected pre-1900 from Sarawak, and by 1960s, there were over 125 animals in private hands in Southeast Asia. And as you could see, the range started contracting, and this was where we were in the mid-1980s in terms of thinking where the orangutans were left. And at that time, the initial thought, we had about only 750 animals left due to the work of Shell in 1960, and also between 700 to 900 or thereabouts in the work in Harrison in 1961. Then luckily for us, we started finding orangutans in some remnant sites marked in X in green. And also, just late last year, an orangutan nest was found in Usung Apau marked X in red in the eastern part of Sarawak. In the 1930s, orangutan distribution historically were marked in black. By 1999, it had shrunk. 2004, it had shrunk further in Borneo. And by 2010, it was perceived that it was just in a small segment of Sarawak where we actually have orangutans left, Pongo pygmaeus. Now, if we look at conservation of orangutan lands, you would have to go back to a time pre-Second World War in 1938, when Lanja and Timau was first created as a protected forest in April 1938. And then there was also the Bukit Berdiri Forest Reserve in 1952. And by 1983, close to 48 years later, you'd have things like Lanja and Timau Wildlife Sanctuary created, 1993. You have Batangai National Park. And by 2021, all these areas were made into conservation areas or national parks or wildlife sanctuaries for orangutans. In purple are the areas that are now considered for conservation of orangutans and orangutan lands. If you look at it across in a timeline, this is what was happening. There were more and more lands where orangutans were found. They were made into protected areas for orangutans. Now, let's turn things around. Protecting the lands. If we don't have orangutans, what does it mean? But we do have orangutans. And here in 1959, 1960 was the first set of orangutan surveys conducted in Sarawak, using things like proposing the idea of nest counts as well. It was done by George Schaller back pre his Wildlife Conservation Society and Panthera days. And he was surveying in places like Simla Jawa and all that. And that black and white photo, if you can see, there's a woman there. This woman, she was in her early 20s. She's now, this is a photograph yesterday. She just turned 86, and the guy on her left is her husband. And yesterday she had her COVID-19 vaccination. That's my mom. And I just discovered all these things about the history of orangutan work within part of my family. My daughter is doing medicine right now and finishing in Glasgow. And this was a piece of work done tracing history on orangutans. And this was me on the left in the image in front of the little baby in 1972. Now, going back to surveys of orangutans, if you look at all the brown lines going vertically, these are the different surveys done for orangutans from 1959 to 2017, and it's still ongoing. So when we start combining the land areas and the number of orangutans together, you start seeing this, that the land area, by the time we finish, we would have over 3,000 square kilometers of lands conserved as orangutan lands. And we would have from just over 1,000 orangutans to perhaps over 2,000 orangutans by the time all the proposed areas get finished. Now, it got a shot in the arm by the belated Chief Minister of Sarawak, who pushed for orangutan conservation and indicating that there's a need to protect this species. And it went into items like zero losses policy for orangutans in their habitats in Sarawak. This was published in the Malaysian Forestry Conference. And recently, in June 2020, in the Sarawak Land Use Master Plan, you'd find that orangutan lands are embedded in it. So there's a long-term continuity to ensure that orangutans remain part of the Sarakan landscape for the future. Is there a plan beyond protecting habitats and counting orangutans? Yeah, not the Larsen format of having them in wildlife preserves, but actually things like in the strategic planning, cross-boundary planning, having orangutans recorded, their histories recorded from the ubans that live around these villages, art and conservation, and also having dialogues with the communities on the ground to make sure that the history, the culture in terms of protecting orangutans are maintained. In terms of the activities, these are some of the activities, if not for Sarawak Forestry Corporation and all the various stakeholders that are engaged in terms of orangutan conservation in Sarawak, ranging from conservation education, field surveys, community and stakeholder engagements, advocacy and political support, anti-poaching patrols, investigative reporting, and totally protected area management. And some images of engaging with Iban communities. For example, this was them helping us to do field surveys to look at the numbers of orangutans on the ground. These are engagements with them to understand what the requirement and conceptual planning based on what the requirements were done were also put into the plans. Here are items that where we document the taboos against killing of orangutans, and also so that the older folks who actually remember these are able to have them put into print. And an interesting byproduct of this was when we actually had discussions with the older folks. Initially, they were seen as, yeah, they're old, they're not contributing much. But when these books came out, suddenly the older people who actually retained these histories were sort of very people looked up to them and went back to them and talked about all these histories of conservation of orangutans. So this was a really useful thing that which was done. On top of that, we actually have engagement with urban communities, things like Run for the Wild and Write for the Wild, storytelling, fiction, creative writing work, essentially with the sole purpose of creating critical mass to try to actually have the general population looking into conserving and saving orangutans. The work that also undoubtedly needs to be done is enforcement work. For example, here, illegal logging was curbed because it was close to the national park. If we are improving protected area management here, we're looking at management effectiveness, and there were 38 points that were being done. It was just completed last week. We have a large UNDP grant coming in to try to make sure that orangutans and their corridors are protected. The engagements with 7 divisions in Forestry Corporation to make sure that the work is done. And this just happened last week. And the long term is what we aspire for in terms of the rightmost column, to actually close to double up the numbers of orangutans, which we started in 1983 to protect the orangutans, to 2,100, and also the landscape which the orangutans can roam in to about 3,100 square kilometers. That's about it from me, and I think I keep within the timeline. Thanks so much.
You did great, Melvin. Thanks so much. And what great work. It makes me happy to see that the protected areas are expanding. Because that's what they need, right? They need that space. They need that habitat.
Yeah, there's this view that, it doesn't matter if these animals go into plantations, it goes into oil palm plantations and all that, but hang on, there is a need for the animal to actually live in a sanctuary, in the security of knowing that they are able to live in there without disturbances from humans and all that. So if we are generous enough to share the world with our relatives and wildlife, we actually have a chance, but we don't have that. It makes life very difficult for them.
No
And
question.
ourselves.
Yeah, and there's just, I mean, there's just such an intrinsic value to wildlife and wild places.
That's right.
And we can't lose them. There's so many ecosystem services that we just can't replace. We need those wild places for our health, for our survival.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's fortuitous that in this way, this iconic species is seen as an ambassador. I mean, it's used in so many logos and all that.
Yeah.
For in sports and all that. But they actually are an important keystone species. And as you can see, it goes beyond the urbanites saying that I want them as icons in our sports logos and all that. It actually is culturally important to the villages that live up there. And for example, there was when we started documenting the cultural history of orangutans to humans, there's even this taboo of not killing orangutans because orangutans taught humans how to give birth. So, in that manner, if we go back to our roots a little bit more, we'll find that, it's important to keep them as part of our landscape,
Yeah, no question. And then, with the palm plantations, taking that beautiful kind of forest away, planting that monoculture. I mean, orangutans, normally they're moving through this varied system, eating all kinds of different foods, dispersing the seeds. They just, that system just doesn't work for them.
Well, it works for some of them, it's like if you have to live in there, you possibly could try to live in there. But you don't need to stress the animal out by having to push them in there. And if you can, for example, this new project that's coming up where we are actually trying to create corridors between two national parks, which actually have orangutans in them. We are essentially trying to allow that these corridors be replanted back with native forests. We're going to do rewilding. It's part of Malaysia's rewilding program. Sarawak has its own forestry corporation, has about 3.5 million trees to plant. But we are following the guidelines of planting in such a manner. We're using local trees, fruit trees, sites which are degraded, sites which we want to actually have corridors for wildlife to come back through. In other words, we're not putting monoculture trees on the ground so that we just have trees. That's not the purpose of it. It's actually a rewilding program with a purpose to allow for orangutans and other wildlife to come through, and not just orangutans, hornbills as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's so important. When you bring back those native species, when you bring back a variety, I think it speeds the process up, the rewilding process, when it's happening, in a way that it would naturally.
That's right. And we have several sites around the state where we are trying to look at it in this way and engaging the communities. In Malaysia, in Sarawak, we have a thing called the B40, the poverty. The people who are not as well off, the levels of, if you want to use the word GDP or earning income, it's much lower. One of the purposes is to actually engage them, work with them, have them help us collect seeds, do nurseries with them, and have them actually go out, plant the trees, and help us maintain it. So in other words, you're creating an ecosystem where the communities, the human communities themselves, actually have a means to actually live in a sustainable manner.
Yeah.
So if you look at things in total, it's not the species conservation alone that we are targeting at, but a way to engage with the community so that they actually benefit from this conservation practice. It's something which we need to think of in a much more wholesome manner and in a much more global manner. That's what we're trying to do as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, people want to protect their communities. They want, it is a real source of pride, I think, for a lot of people to have wild spaces and orangutans, close to the community, and giving jobs just makes it easier to support them. So definitely a really important piece, health and jobs and feeling safe.
Yeah, and we actually have engaged with a travel company. Warrior Adventure, and they've been working with us for over 30 years now. And in essence, what it involves is they have communities go up, tourists go up to these sites. The communities have engaged since 1986. They
Yep.
provide scholarships for people to go back to school. They actually have a Longhouse Foundation. And we are also talking about now watching and identifying degraded sites for replanting. So at a time of COVID, when tourism disappears just about, you actually have a huge drop in terms of revenue coming into the community. So as a means to try to avoid that trap, you actually identify alternate lines in which revenue is provided back to the community. And as the world goes into things like nature-based solutions, planting, trying to go after climate change, another set of targets is available to engage these communities so that you can actually have them not drop off and be poor again, but actually live in a sustainable manner with a level of revenue that will help them. So in a way, conservation is a really long-term, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And all these little challenges that pop up every so often, you need to be aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to think upon multiple streams. You have to think outside of the realm of conservation.
That's right.
And then I'm glad you brought up tourism, because I do think, in the foreseeable future that it's going to pick up again. And tourism doesn't have to be a negative thing when done sustainably, when done thoughtful, bringing science into it as well. Bringing the community into it, then it can be just a huge source for conservation of not only revenue, but then jobs for those surrounding the parks.
Indeed. I mean, if you look at the communities that we have engaged with, some of them are involved in providing information which actually help with anti-poaching patrols. You actually have information you collect with the villagers when they're going out with tourists, which then serve as citizen science for distributional maps where orangutans are. So they can, and they are a major important group that we actually have to continually to engage with and to make sure that they're long-term partners, not just recipients, actually enable conservation to be done in such a manner. And if you look at the laws going back in 1983, the engagement of the communities had already been there, because there are things like customary rights recognized into land proclamations so that their lands could be identified inside those protected areas, if there are. So in a way, this is constantly moving, and the conservationists has to keep in touch, literally on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to kind of touch on and just give a shout out to the Whitley Fund for Nature, the Conservation Awards. I know that the latest round was just about a week ago, and I caught some of it live and saw some of the new projects around the world. It's just an absolutely amazing fund and amazing opportunity. So do check out the Whitley Fund for Nature and some of the amazing awardees from around the world for the last several decades. Melvin, how did that help your work? What did that mean to get that support?
It's absolutely amazing. I mean, we went, in a way, the group, I was just sitting on the shoulders of all these people that are working on this. It allowed and opened up a lot of doors. It was recognition that the work is actually on par with elsewhere. You often hear this thing about the prophet is never recognized in their own hometown kind of thing. But once you actually get an award like that, all of a sudden it's like, oh, other people are acknowledging that it's actually useful pieces of work.
Yeah.
So as a result, then discussions with donors became much simpler, much more engaging. Discussions with people who are involved in policy work the same. Media was a huge ally, because all of a sudden, when you do useful work that's recognized elsewhere, it becomes easier to be able to get the message out. So in that manner, was there actually a really useful shot in the arm for orangutan conservation? So yeah. And I thank them for that. And they are in constant contact, and they've asked that I help to mentor a bunch of Whitley awardees in Southeast Asia starting this year. So we've actually formed a small little group to try to make sure that we keep injecting energy into the Whitley awardees. Yes, it's absolutely great to have them.
Yeah, and great to hear that it's not just kind of like a one and done thing, that the support, the contact, it keeps going. So that's right. That's great too. And I really think, conservationists should be put up there, right up there with movie stars and other famous people, because, you guys are rock stars, the work you're doing. It's so critical to the communities, to the health, to the just value for our planet. So Melvin, thank you so much for the work you're doing, and thank you so much for taking us into that world today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're wrapping up this session. We're going to switch over shortly to session 6. So you can head back over to your timeline, and we'll be restarting in session 6 very shortly. But I do want to say just a happy International Biodiversity or Day for Biological Diversity. It's an exciting day. Obviously, a big reason why we chose to have the festival over this weekend. So I hope that I think you should do 2 things today: spend a big chunk of your day hanging out with us, and then spend a little bit of time too getting outside and into nature. So bring us with you. Bring your computer outside too, so you can tune in and still be outside in nature. So big day today. Melvin, thank you so much, and we look forward to connecting again.
Bye. Thanks very much for having me. Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, Melvin.